Being here. Let's expand this. I want to welcome John Yao from Team Secret and Scott McMillan from Method. Hey guys, welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Again?
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. All right, very happy to have some new minds here, and I'm so excited about this panel because all three of you are starting to engage with the Axie ecosystem, but in kind of different ways. Jason's maybe a little bit newer, and my advice to him was watch, learn, come hang out at AxieCon. I'll introduce you to some players, and let's see what happens. John, Team Secret, you guys dove into Axie early. You said this scholarship thing is cool. We've got a big presence in Southeast Asia. Let's go for it. I just want to get my hands dirty and dive in. And Scott, you guys have a huge history of running events and tournaments. You've already announced a huge Axie tournament that's taking place, I think, underway already, and have very much committed to Web3. So I'm excited to extend this conversation of where Jason and I just left off of how this starts to shift the business model for your different teams and kind of what you're most excited about in terms of Web3 rails and that intersection of esports. So John, I want to start with you. First of all, welcome to the panel. I love the shirt. You look great, man.
Thanks. I actually got it here.
Oh, perfect.
So I was like, I need to represent Barcelona, right? So.
Good. Play to the audience. I like it. You know your crowd. But how are you, man? How's AxieCon been?
Good. Yeah, I mean, very excited to be here. I think the energy in the community here is like really amazing. As soon as I walked in, I was like, wow, this is like pretty cool. I mean, this is the first convention I've been to since before COVID. So it's super exciting to be here in person, see the community get together in person, and just loving the energy.
Absolutely. And Scott, welcome to the panel as well. How are you, sir? We got to sync up last night. A pleasure to have you here in Barcelona.
Yeah, this is my first Web3 event, and I'm definitely not disappointed. It's been great to be here with the Axie community. We actually have quite a few of our players actually competing in the esports programs that's going on here at the event, so we've been catching up with those guys as well. It's been great to follow. I think the finals are going to be on this stage later today, so I'm really excited to follow that. And, yeah.
We're the lead-in, so we'll see. Fingers crossed. Maybe you'll see excuse me, some of your players on the main stage. So John, you were one of the earlier ones to make this dive into Axie Infinity. I'm curious, maybe some of your high-level takeaways. The scholarship model has changed a little bit. How have you guys adapted to the turbo speed in which Web3 moves at?
I think the biggest learning is, finding out that a lot of gamers and traditional gamers have such apprehension towards like Web3 gaming. And it's something that we have tried to sort of mend and build the bridge between Web2 and Web3 gaming. And a lot of it has to do with communication, education, and just kind of like making our community feel like, hey, this is it's safe, right?
Yeah.
And it's like for us, Web3 gaming is it's a venture that we want to be in because we believe it's the next frontier. And the next big thing in gaming, and we truly believe that. And maybe our community doesn't believe that yet, but maybe there are ways. And because the business models in Web3 and Web2 haven't totally been defined yet, and there's a lot of room to explore, we think there will be opportunities that make Web3 gaming very palatable to traditional gamers, and we'll get there eventually.
I'm glad you mentioned education, because that word gets thrown out a lot, but I think the execution of the education is what's really important. How's that been for you guys with Method? Have you found similar struggles in getting your users to understand what's happening here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to maybe give a little bit of background about why we got so interested in Web3 in the first place. So, for those that don't know, Method is like a 17-year legacy esports organization. We started things back in 2005, mainly as World of Warcraft. And as you mentioned, we've been very focused on putting on events. We're actually probably most well known for putting on the Race to World of First in World of Warcraft. That's like a huge event that just takes over Twitch when it goes live like every 6 months or so. But with Method, we've always tried to, I guess you could say, focus on being in control of our own destiny. Because typically the economics of esports, it's pretty challenging for esports orgs out there right now. Like the major tournaments that take place, like the franchisee leagues, like the LEC, the LCS, that kind of stuff. Also, it's happening in the other major games like CSGO and whatnot. Basically, what you have in esports right now is a lot of the revenue is typically flowing, to the publishers or to the tournament organizers first. That's on media rights, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff. And there's like less of a trickle down, I guess you could say, to the actual esports organizations. That at the same time as all the other economic stuff that's going on, like player salaries increasing, prize pools, all that kind of stuff. So with Method, I guess you could say we've always been very focused on trying to have more ownership in a space that's very difficult to actually have ownership, as an esports organization. So content creation, big focus, putting on our own events that we have full control of, like through the Baseball First. Jason's very familiar with this. He's put on a few of these himself over the years. But then owning like a bunch of websites. So the educational content piece you mentioned, very, very interesting for us. When it comes to World of Warcraft, we've always done like a lot of class guides, a lot of boss guides, like offered a ton of educational content through websites, but also on YouTube. So really just trying to, like I said, control more of our own destiny through the ownership of the digital assets. So like mobile app, desktop app, websites, and content creation events. And so when Web3 was coming along, this is towards the end of last year, we definitely took a good look at what YGG was doing, obviously, with the scholarship model and whatnot. But like the fundamentals of it, like the opportunity for players and teams to have like an ownership stake potentially, or ownership to digital assets in the Web3 games, that really got us interested. It's just like basically an evolution of what we were already trying to do with Method over the years. And so we kind of dived into it with both feet at the end of last year when we created Method MetaGuild. And so obviously the space is still quite young. There's obviously a lot of challenges when it comes to the Web2 side of things, especially in the space that we're involved in. We primarily focus on MMOs, RPGs like World of Warcraft, Path of Exile, Diablo, Minecraft, stuff like that. That player base, they're very PC focused. There's definitely a lot of resistance, I guess you could say, right now for Web3. But for me personally, I believe it's the future. And a lot of the conversations I've been having with like people who are running a lot of the esports orgs are very, they share the same kind of mindset. It's just that the shift, I think, from the player side of things is going to take a little bit longer. Than
I'd love to unpack that resistance a little bit. Very well said, by the way, because it's something that we all deal with, and I think it's a risk and actually a little bit scary to think, how is our traditional audience going to react to this? I see the value, I believe in it, but how do we communicate it in a way that our audience will see that value and start to believe it? It was a big challenge, but one thing that made me feel confident was knowing that when I made the switch, there were a couple Dota pros that went, oh, this looks interesting. One of them is here. His name is 1437. He won Season 21 of Classic, and he just won the first Season 0 of Origin. And for me to see a Dota pro make that switch and really embrace the community, the game, and see what this is about, that makes me feel like we're really onto something. But we still haven't really cracked the code on how do we get that to happen in mass? How do we get the bulk of gamers to really embrace this? Jason, I'm curious what your thoughts here. How do we tackle this?
I just think you keep doing what you're doing. You need to work, obviously, with Sky Mavis and encourage them to continue to support the esports ecosystem. You need to support the players, whether it's on social media or however that might be. To any sophisticated observer, it's not rocket science that despite exponentially growing audiences, the team business model has been a challenge to monetize since day one. Sponsorships still remain, kind of the lion's share of our revenue. We've now been able to get revenue share, as was mentioned, from nearly every league. But the developers and the centralized creators of the game still kind of monopolize not only the control of the community, the control of the game, what happens in the game, and the revenue streams. And as part of Web3, for me, just from a business perspective, I really see it as a way to grow the team business model, the league business model, and as we talked about earlier, the casual gamer's ownership inside the game. I'm a firm believer that as we all get more tangible, real ownership in the games are actually going to do better. The games are going to last longer. They're going to create even more passionate communities. And I certainly tip my hat to both John and Scott for being pioneers. As John mentioned, it's not easy from our end to necessarily dive headfirst into this community. I'm just being really honest. We've built brands over years and years and years, and not everyone in gaming and esports sees what we collectively see, so we take a lot of heat. I'll be honest, I will take heat for speaking on this stage today. I don't care, but that's kind of what we're dealing with. We're trying to deal with brands that have spent years and years of passion and sweat and tears to build and integrate them into this world because we believe what you are building answers a lot of the problems, not only for us and our players, but for everyone in the entire community. So I tip my hat to them. They were definitely here before me. I'm here to humbly learn and continue to meet people in this wonderful community. But I'm confident, as I keep saying, that what you are building is the next thing. And I hope someone quotes me in 5 years. Web3 gaming is what's next.
Yeah, I've definitely.
There you go.
Strong statement. Well, I definitely feel Jason's passion there. I was actually saying to him when I chatted to him the other day that I obviously follow him on Twitter, and I've seen him in so many spaces in regards to like the Web3 movement. He's definitely doing his research. So I think he's probably been in this a little bit longer than he's hinting. I think, but yeah.
Yeah. John, how were you able to dive in so confidently? Because you and I have known each other for a pretty long time, so we had a pretty early conversation as the scholarships were really taking off. But you guys were very early movers, and you seemed so eager and confident to accept that risk, and we're just going to figure it out. That's how we learn. What gave you that confidence?
Well, I think it's actually the economics side of things. When you look at the economics of traditional esports and traditional esports teams, right? We all know, I mean, it's shit. I think something like 90% plus, 95% of esports organizations on the team side are not profitable. Right, they just lose money, and they continue to invest in it, as fans, as a community, and in hopes of the business model shifting or evolving into something that may become one day sustainable. But it's not so much today. And so esports, from a business perspective, is really for like the top 5%. Right, you win every tournament, or your brand is so big that you can actually build something that's sustainable. Whereas everybody else, sort of like the middle class and below, it's hard to kind of get into that. What we really liked about Web3 and about Axie is that it democratizes sort of the economics of esports and gaming, so that it's not only like the top 5% that can thrive or even participate, but it's everybody can participate in the economy of gaming, right? And so, like 1437, right? He won the season. He's probably doing okay financially in terms of the rewards and everything, right? But even if you're an unranked player, right, you can still do okay. You can still participate, and that to me is very powerful. And kind of upends the traditional construct of how economies work in gaming. And so that to us was the main attraction towards why we think this is sort of the future.
Wow, I love it. To follow up on that, does anything scare you about this concept of the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization? Such a big, scary word. I love the potential. I love the philosophy of players having say in the ecosystem where they spend so much time. But when I start to think about it in a world where there isn't a lot of KYC, we don't have a lot of Sybil resistance in some cases, I get a little nervous about attack vectors. Are you guys still pretty bullish on DAOs? Do you get nervous that the players might make short-term decisions at the expense of long-term?
To an extent.
Yeah.
To an extent. I'm very bullish towards the concept of it, but I do believe that having sort of too much democracy where everybody gets a say in everything is probably not healthy, because not everybody is informed about every topic. And so I think the concept of the DAO is good, but with potentially more centralized guidelines around what can be voted upon and what can be engaged. Because there are things where, as a developer, you have much more knowledge and what's more, insight into these are the critical things that we need in order to make this, what it is. And you can't necessarily have, the community sort of take you away from that, central path. But there are design elements within that you can let the community decide. So I think it's more like, democratize sort of the decisions, but within certain guidelines.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with him what you said. That's well said, actually. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Like in general, I am just when it goes going back to the gaming side of things. I do think there's going to be a big shift in the future. Like we talked about, like right now it's like 99% publisher, game developer controlled. Seeing more of that percentage go to the community, I think is 100% the future, and that's what I'm really excited about here.
Yeah. I just feel like it gets complicated sometimes in free market economies, because what's best for one individual actor might not be best for the sustainability of the economy at large, right? Some systems are kind of zero-sum by nature. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around this, Jason. Like, do you get nervous when you see how DAOs are structured? And there's been a lot of experiments already. Some have gone better, some have gone worse. So we do have a little data to pull from.
I am definitely going to step back and say this is where my expertise kind of ends. From what I do understand, I'm confident that DAOs or some form of the DAO system is going to be very critical in the future, and not only the future of gaming, but beyond. But like John said, there need to be guardrails. We need to understand that human nature tends to lead some people towards wanting to corrupt the systems that are so critical to what other people enjoy. So I think without guardrails, DAOs can run amok. Pure democracy under the definition of that term, can be a bit challenging and dangerous without those guardrails. So I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to DAOs. I'm really bullish on the long-term future of what they stand for, but I'm also at times a bit concerned and cynical that we need to build them in a way that accounts for human nature and the tendency of some to want to destroy the beauty that's been created by others.
Totally. And I mean, we have to also remember the nature of competition. It is a player's job, a manager's job to push for every possible advantage within the rule set, right? Push for that 5 minutes, push for that extra bit of rest. And it's a tournament admin's job to push back and say, hey, no, that's against the rules. There's a line and we've now stepped over, so dial it back. And those two forces kind of keep each other in check. So like you said, you need those guardrails where the players can't also be the administrators because now we have a conflict of interest. And that's a little too granular, but when you zoom out, it's like, okay, what does it mean to have a game that's owned and governed by the players if the players are the competitors and they're building part of that esports infrastructure? It turns into a really interesting conversation, I think. Okay, cool. So I want to talk about the rails of Web3, and I want to calibrate this conversation because one thing that drives me crazy is when people in crypto talk about how crypto is the answer to everything. We've solved human greed because we've got the blockchain. Folks, that's not true. Blockchain and smart contracts do not solve for the human condition. They don't solve for human greed, but they do maybe give us some more tools to insulate ourselves against these temptations. One of the most simple implementations I talk about is USDC on mainnet Ethereum. Stuff like what community gaming is doing, where they're building these tools that have back-end automation, where now tournament organizers can create a bracket, they can lock the prize pool into a smart contract so everyone knows it's verified, it's there, that the money exists, and then when the tournament's complete and the results are verified, the admin clicks one button, and that money goes to all the players immediately, no matter where they are in the world. Their user address on the website is their wallet, so there's no paperwork, there's no waiting for all this information, there's no insane wire fees, assuming the gas isn't too high at that given moment. But to me, this is actually a really fundamental thing that can help esports in a very aggregate way. All of us, I think, have suffered some of the pain points of trying to move money internationally on a global scale. I'd be curious, do we concur? I mean, are we looking towards like larger rails to really have an impact, or can we start small and kind of build from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it solves a lot of the current challenges in esports. It's not, these challenges are not faced, every day, but they still pop up. And challenges like transparency, right? So there are still tournaments that, and this happened much more long ago. Doesn't happen so much today, but it still happens, where you go to a tournament, you play the tournament, and all of a sudden, a month later after the tournament is over, you're like, oh, where's the prize pool? Is the organizer still around? What's going on, right? So there's transparency in having the smart contract out there and having the funds are kind of directly visible. And then there are pain points like the length of time it takes between the tournament actually occurring and people getting paid, players getting paid, the organization getting paid, casters, talent, everybody else getting paid. And this makes it sort of instant. And then there's challenges like transferring money internationally. Right? We have players that are all over the world, and in some jurisdictions that it's not very easy to make wire transfers. And so this makes it borderless. And to us, it solves many of the major challenges that exist today in esports.
I have vivid memories of going into the bank to do a physical wire transfer to send money to Colombia. That poor artist, he did such amazing work, and it took so much time to send him that relatively humble invoice. Scott, I'm curious if you have anything to add here on this sort of Rails discussion.
Just again, echoing what John said there, the transparency element and the verification element is great, especially for the examples you gave there. I agree with pretty much what you said.
Well, so how about the next level? I have seen a ton of white papers and decks for these hugely elaborate esports fan token systems. And they sort of have different angles, but generally they tend to be framed as like a Twitch killer, where we're a streaming platform, we're a fan token, there's all this engagement and all the value gets captured, and players can issue tokens, and there's varying degrees of complexity. But often when I look at these systems, I think, we're jumping too many steps ahead. We need to establish a base to this thing before we start building up. And a lot of those systems, to me, I think it needs users to work.
Right.
And I don't know how we get that many users to jump aboard on something that's that new and so complicated. I feel like we need to go a little bit step by step. But I'd be curious if anyone here maybe had a bullish case for some of those platforms. Is there going to be a Web3 Twitch killer? Any thoughts around that? Because I hear that it's like the World of Warcraft killers. World of Warcraft is still going. So
everything's a killer. I think there's some interesting. Am I on?
Yep,
Okay.
there we go.
I think there's some interesting. I don't want to. There we go. Are we?
I think we're cool. There we go.
There's some interesting platforms out there. You got Chili's and Rally and some others. And what makes me smile, and this I think comes a bit with age, is the average person in the community, in my opinion, they say, oh, we're early. You don't understand how early we still are. Because I can look back to when I founded Complexity, there was no YouTube yet, there was no Facebook yet. There was things that you grew up with and take for granted were not there yet. I remember this clip, I think it's from the Today Show or something, where they're sitting around drinking their coffee and they're like, what is the internet? What are we supposed to do on the internet? And people play that today and they laugh at it. But that's where we are in Web3. We are still in the kind of the MySpace phase, where you've got this wallet, you've got these C phrases. Like, it takes intellectual intentionality to just engage with some of this ecosystem, right? You remember the first time you got into Axie, you're like, wait a minute, I gotta buy these and I need this and run. It's not intuitive. As more and more companies come along, whether it's with creator systems or Web3 type of Twitch platforms, and make it more intuitive, imagine the jump from MySpace to the Facebooks, and then it goes to the Twitter, to the TikTok. Just imagine that history of the internet. You're going to see that again through Web3, you are all pioneers. And your children are going to be like, wait a minute, you had to have wallets, you had what was a ledger? They're going to think it was so antiquated, so MySpace, it's like coding, what is going on? Because all of this is going to mature, and Web3 is going to be built into everything in our daily lives. And I'm really passionate, and I'm a big believer that it's going to improve lives all around the world, the developing markets in the Western world, all around the world. So how that affects creators is going to be positive. How that affects team owners is going to be positive. How that affects developers and gamers is going to be positive. And as usual, gamers are probably going to be leading the charge, right? Gamers are usually at the front, the pioneers, the trailblazers, building these things when they're still hard to do. Well, you wait for grandma to catch up with Facebook so she can click one button to share a picture from her birthday party. And that's where it's going to go. It's going to get easier. It's going to get more ubiquitous. But what you are building and what we are doing, you are still very early, and it is going to change the world.
I often say a lot of Web3 right now is still developers building things for developers. We haven't hired the UX guys yet, but they're coming. They're coming. And believe me, Sky Mavis is hiring UI people like crazy because easing these pain points is a huge part of user adoption.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily looking actually for, when I look at a lot of these new projects that are coming out, I'm not really looking for, oh, this is the next Twitch or this is the next YouTube, right? Because I think that even if you look at like traditional web development, there's already a Twitch, there's already a YouTube. When new platforms come out, like when we first started in esports, Team Secret, you have your traditional social media platforms, and now it's like, oh, what's our TikTok strategy? How do we move content in a form that really appeals to the community on that platform? And it's a platform that has elements of other platforms, but it's like kind of different, right? And so for Web3, I'm looking forward to new use cases, right? That's not going to be, this is the Twitch of Web3, but this is going to be something entirely different that defines a new use case that people really, really enjoy, that really want to get into it. And so, I think that'll be, what is going to be game-breaking and very successful.
Some real innovation. Scott, anything to add there?
Listen, these guys are taking it away again, yeah?
Perfect. Well, maybe we'll give you to start one as we start to wind things down here and get closer to our esports showcase. I don't want to be too hyper positive, even though I am bullish. What has you guys nervous right now? What are the vectors where you feel like, where are some cracks where things can slip through? Scott, what keeps you up at night when you think about Web3 and esports specifically?
The scene itself is just evolving so rapidly. Like this, you've constantly obviously got to be on the move to keep up with what's going on and be quite innovative, which is something we've always tried to do with Method anyway. But for example, when we first started Method Matic Guild, like at the end of last year, obviously the scholarship model was extremely popular, right? So to begin with, we ramped up to like 4,000 scholars extremely quickly. Now, obviously, the economics of that's changed significantly. We've kind of pulled back quite significantly to focus more on like the competitive and like the esports pro side of things. So just constantly shifting, I guess, and adapting to what the landscape is bringing. But that being said, like the overall idea of it, regardless of the changes, the future is obviously still looking very, very bright. I would say what's keeping me up at night is definitely coming from the traditional gaming and esports background and like heavily involved in World of Warcraft personally. Like I said, I know the resistance to obviously the Web3. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get over that. That definitely keeps me up a bit for sure, because obviously we still run Method, the esports org, working with like 40, 50 content creators, players. So I think when it comes to like the new venture into Web3, we've mainly been able to lean, I guess you could say, on like our experience and expertise from the staff team, I guess, in running Method and putting on all the events and everything. But I think the content creators and players side, that's something that's going to have to tag along a lot later. So I'm excited to see when that actually happens. But for us, because we're so focused on MMOs, RPGs, it's mainly like the very prominent desktop kind of PC games that we're focused on. And I think the fast adoption that's coming right now is mainly in the mobile space, right? Which is great. But I think it's going to take a little bit longer for like our core like gamers and content creators to kind of make the jump. And that comes obviously with continued developments. And I love what I'm seeing here at AxieCon, like the builder program you guys are doing. That's awesome. And I'm excited to see what comes from that.
I mean, I can feel that anecdotally. I was very negative about mobile esports in 2018, 2017 when that dialogue was emerging. I've told this story before, but when I first met Psychout in 2018, he said, we might have esports with this one day. And I said, mobile esports? Forget about Web3. The fact that it's mobile isn't going to make it possible. Obviously, I was completely wrong. That was an ego-driven thesis because I was a hardcore PC Dota gamer
PC
guy.
master race.
Exactly. So I've certainly evolved that dialogue a bit, and now I think mobile is this next big wave to include so many more gamers around the world. But John, what keeps you up at night?
What Scott said. No, I'm kidding. So I think innovation requires experimentation, right? And so what keeps me up at night is how do we experiment, but experiment also in a safe or insulated way, because experimentation carries risk, right? And if you look at a lot of the esports orgs and esports teams that have done things like issue your fan token, things like that, by and large, those have not been very well received because the use cases have been kind of flimsy, right? And it's nice to have esports organizations experiment and do these things in Web3, but when you look back on it, some of them have been kind of rug pullish, and some of them have been flimsy in the use case, and some of them just like have not worked out one way or the other. And I think that for us, I want to continue experimenting. I want to continue to invest in Web3 projects, but I want to do it in a way that doesn't open up like, oh, I do this Web3 project, and because the community has such a negative backlash towards it, it kills off any other experiments that I want to do. Right? So I want to do it in a way where it's like, oh, we're experimenting into this type of project. It may or may not work out, but even if it doesn't work out, then we can try a different one without sort of the bad taste in people's mouths on your ability to pursue future projects.
I like that. Responsible experimentation. Beautiful. Jason, last but certainly not least, what's got you worried here from your perspective?
I totally agree with what's already been said, so I don't want to repeat that. And I don't want to go down too deep a rabbit hole with macroeconomics. But as I've said, I'm incredibly bullish on Web3. It's easy to be short-term worried. We saw the Ronin hack, and if you follow the space, it feels like every other day there's a hack or there's a rug pull, and there's so much negative news that comes that can almost divert your attention from all the positivity that's happening. Me personally, I'm often a macro person, so I worry about overregulation by governments around the world that will stifle innovation. But again, that's a rabbit hole we don't have time to go down today. But when you look at what is coming and you look at Web3, blockchain technology, zero proof, and all the beautiful things that can be built on top of that and how it can change the world, nothing is going to stop this. No government is going to stop this. No WEF, IMF, no World Bank, no central bank is going to stop this. This is a freight train that is unstoppable. Will there be bumps on the road? Absolutely. But together, people that are passionate about this are going to change the world, and I'm not worried about a whole lot beyond that.
Wow, we are lucky to have you up here, man. Thank you so much. Very well said. Folks, that wraps up our panel about the broken economics of esports. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists, Scott, John, and Jason. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And thank you so much for your contributions to the ecosystem. Folks, we're going to have a break, enjoy lunch, and then we're going to come on back, and we've got a lot of esports action coming your way, the classic best-of-5 grand finals, and then the last few series of Origin right here on the main stage. Buckle your seatbelts.
Nope, I'm sorry. You're
No?
jumping the gun. We aren't doing lunch yet. We've got 2 more panels. Please, everybody stay.
I completely screwed up, everyone. I'm so sorry. Thank
Andrew's
God we have an
hungry.
MC
We
here to save
understand.
me. Kaylee,
Thank you
please
guys
take it away.
so much. One more round of applause for our esports panel. Good job.